Call the meeting to order. Approval of the minutes.
Yeah. Good evening. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, October 24th. We have a quorum. Roll call here is
Yes, sir.
and the first item on the agenda is the Waterfront Overlay District Development Plan Review Zoning Ordinance, Article 26. There's nothing there. This is not a public hearing. I want to remind folks, we did have a public hearing at our last meeting several weeks ago. At that time, we asked folks to I extended the courtesy of allowing people to send in their testimony in writing, which is already on the record if you spoke. In addition, we allowed other people to present their letters and concerns. We have received all of those. They have been distributed to the planning board and to the applicant. Some of them were received a few hours ago. So that makes it a little difficult for the applicant to respond to some of those. But at this point, I just wanted to remind you, what we're hearing, what I'm hoping you're here to do today, the folks who are not on the planning board or not representing the developer, is to listen and learn. And to hear what the planning board has to say. We were quiet at the last meeting by design because we wanted to hear what everyone had to say without a dialogue and without any heat. And so I ask for your forbearance. If you hear something that you don't like, please stifle it. You know, it's important for the decorum and for the atmosphere to ensure that when we're talking about something, we have the respect, as will the applicant, and as will anybody else who's here. So if you do have concerns, there will be at some point another public hearing before any significant steps are taken on this. So please keep that in mind. I appreciate you coming because there is a lot of specious information out there, unfortunately, that has been circulated through the medium of social media, which is the bane of our existence sometimes. It's a wonderful thing, but it's also a means by which, you know, people can spread misinformation and it gets amplified. And that is what has happened in some cases. And we hope that we can put that stuff to rest, and we're dealing with this on an even playing field with the facts as they are. I'll now call the meeting to order. We have an approval of minutes from June 27th, July 5th, August 22nd, September 12th, September 26th, and October 1st. Can I do that as all one motion?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so could I have a motion to accept those minutes or amend them if necessary? Ashley, a second. Mike, all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. The next order of business is the master plan approval or the master plan discussion regarding the comprehensive permit application AP2 lots 21, 23, 119 and 125 Water Street. The owner applicant is 119 Water Holding LLC. Bob, did you want to present prior to?
Yes.
Okay. Before we move forward, Bob really will read the matters that we must consider as the planning board serving on the comprehensive permit for approval or denial of this proposal.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on your comment about misinformation. There was,
Comments?
you know,
Oh,
somebody-
yeah, should we do the written comments first?
yeah, you should open the public meeting,
Okay.
public hearing just for the purpose of
So
accepting.
in order to get any of those written comments that you folks have sent since the meeting, I'm going to open it as a public meeting,
Public hearing.
accept those, and then close the meeting. So there's no sleight of hand here. It's a means by which we can get that information that you folks spent the time and effort on into the record so that it must be considered at any time should this decision be questioned. So could I have a motion to open the public meeting to accept that?
Motion to open the public meeting to accept the
Second. Okay,
comments.
all in favor?
Aye.
So we will accept now all of those documents that have come in up till 7 o'clock today.
Mr.
Brett?
Chair, now that the public meeting is reopened, appreciate the fact that the board wants to consider the public comments that were submitted in written form. Some of those comments came in rather late, even, you know, several minutes or just a short time ago. I would ask that the applicant have a reasonable amount of time to respond to those written comments.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yes,
you.
for sure. I mean, again, and you know, in the future, always best to send it in before the last gun has gone, because it makes a greater impression, but there you have it. So yes, your reservation is accepted.
And that our responses to the written comments will be considered part of the record.
Yes, it will.
Thank you.
For sure. Okay, so we will accept all of those
need to vote on that?
and,
I think you did.
yeah, it
Just a
was just
motion to.
Close it.
the public hearing.
motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second, Mike, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Yeah, so certainly reading through all of the emails, there seems to be some misinformation out there, some mischaracterization of whether or not there's enforcement with respect to affordable housing. These are all statutes that exist with respect to housing in the legislature. The last one highlighted is what this application came in under. There are copies of it up front here if you would like to read through it. It talks about the timelines and the responsibilities of the planning board. To the comment that someone made in the newspaper that there's no enforcement, that's categorically incorrect. If you read through the statute, when a community does not meet the 10% affordable requirement, that is when a comprehensive permit application has to be considered. If a community meets the 10% threshold, they do not have to accept comprehensive permit applications. As I said at the last meeting, we're at 4.23%. So we're obligated, whether we like it or not, to accept that application. It is not local law, it is state law. So I want to be clear about that. Next slide, please. So the required findings, and this is different than if this came in as a normal planning board or zoning board application. This is pursuant to state statute. The required findings in improving on an application, the local review board shall make positive findings supported by legally competent evidence on the record, which discloses the nature and character of the observations upon which the fact finders acted on each of the following standard provisions where applicable. That the proposed development is consistent with local needs as identified in the comprehensive community plan, with particular emphasis on the community's affordable housing plan, and or has satisfactorily addressed the issues where there may be inconsistencies. The next one is that the proposed development is in compliance with the standards and provisions of the municipality zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, and or were expressly varied or waived. Local concerns that have been affected by the relief granted do not outweigh the state and local need for low and moderate income housing. All low and moderate income housing units proposed are integrated throughout the development, are compatible in scale and architectural style to the market rate units within the project, and will be built and occupied prior to or simultaneous with the construction and occupancy of any market rate units. There will be no significant negative environmental impact from the proposed development as shown on the final plan, with all required conditions for approval. There will be no significant negative impacts on the health and safety of the current or future residents of the community in areas including, but not limited to, safe circulation of pedestrian and vehicular traffic, provision of emergency services, sewage disposal, availability of potable water, adequate surface water runoff, and the preservation of natural, historical, cultural features that contribute to the attractiveness of the community. All proposed land developments and all subdivision lots will have adequate and permanent physical access to a public street in accordance with the requirements of 452365. And last, that the proposed development will not result in the creation of any individual lots with any physical constraints to development, that building on those lots according to the pertinent regulations and building standards would be impractical unless created only as a permanent open space or permanently reserved for a public purpose on the approved recorded plans. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, at this point, we'd like the applicant to present. After that's finished, the board will then comment based on your latest information and on the information that we've received at the last public hearing and since that public hearing. And again, if there's some concerns about anything being brought up that you had not seen prior to this, then, you know, I'd ask you to tell us that. But it did, by my read of these things, almost everything was an amplification of information that had come in before. So it wasn't, I believe we're operating on the same page, despite the fact that there was additional evidence given. So, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it pleases the chair, we'll sit in a panel style, give a brief
Sure.
presentation. That way, as the board asks whatever questions it has, we can figure out who's going to address it and slide the microphone in front of whoever is up to bat.
Okay, you want to introduce all yourselves so that,
Just for the record, you introduce
Yeah.
everyone.
Sure. Brett Yadley, Chase Ruttenberg and Friedman on behalf of the applicant.
Julie Bartlett, ZDS architect for the applicant.
Joe Cosnelli, Rhode Island registered professional engineer, for the.
Okay. All set?
yeah,
Okay. Before we get into a little bit of information we'd like to share with the board, I just want to expand a little bit on what Mr. Rulli discussed so that the board is clear about what its objectives are here and pursuant to statute. Mr. Rulli outlined it nicely that the 10% requirement is by operation of statute. The statute is very clear that when an applicant meets the submission requirements, which this applicant has, and presents on the required findings in accordance with the statute, which this applicant has, as the evidence will, when the record is fully developed, will demonstrate, then the statute dictates that the board shall review the application in accordance with the standards of 45-53-4. In the statute, the reasons for why a board can deny such an application are made very clear. There's essentially 5 reasons that the board can rely on to deny an application. The first one is one we just discussed, that the community has met the goal of 10%. And that's where the 10% aspect becomes a requirement. Here we know that the town has not met the 10% threshold. So if the town is not meeting the threshold, the board cannot deny this application for that reason. Okay? The second reason that the board can deny such an application is for concerns over the environment and the health and safety of current residents, concerns that have not been adequately addressed by the application or the presentation. So if there are environmental or health and safety concerns that have not been addressed, then the board can treat the application as discretionary and deny. But if the application addresses those concerns, then the board cannot deny for that reason. And here we know that the environmental laws applicable to developing this property must be complied with. There are various DEM permits and CRMC permits that must be obtained. In addition, there will be no health or safety concerns that have not been addressed by the applicant's proposal. How do we know that? The Technical Review Committee reviewed this application. It reviewed it in terms of pedestrian safety, parking, emergency vehicle access. There are various elements of the Technical Review Committee review that touch upon the technical aspects of this development and that speak to the health and safety of the proposal. The Technical Review Committee reviewed the application and approved it. The third reason for why this board could deny this application is if the town has an approved affordable housing plan and is meeting its housing needs, and the proposal is inconsistent with the affordable housing plan. If the town is meeting its needs, then this board can treat the application as discretionary and deny. If it's not, that's not a reason that the board can act to deny. The fourth reason, there's only one more after this, is that the proposal is not consistent with local needs, including but not limited to, and I'm quoting the statute here, the needs identified in an approved comprehensive plan and or local zoning ordinances and procedures promulgated in conformance with the comprehensive plan. Well, according to the case law, and the leading case on this is JCM LLC versus Town of Cumberland, 889 A second 169, that's a 2005 case. Whether a zoning or land use requirement is consistent with local needs or not essentially depends on whether the town is currently meeting its statutory quota for affordable housing units. That's the driving factor for whether consistent with local needs is being met in that fourth reason. Okay. The case law also establishes a three-part test in its review of that consideration. If a town receives an application that would be prohibited by the zoning or land use ordinance, the zoning ordinance can be a basis for denial if a three-part test is met. The three-part test is A, there's a comprehensive hearing. B, the town has adopted a comprehensive plan that includes a housing element that addresses affordable housing. And C, the community has met or has exceeded its statutory minimum for affordable housing units. So according to the case law, the board cannot deny an application under the comprehensive permit under the factors I mentioned earlier for this fourth reason, which is not consistent with local needs. The driving factor there is whether the town has met its quota. And the fifth reason that the board can deny an application is that the proposal is not in conformance with the comprehensive plan. I won't belabor this point and go through the various points of the comprehensive plan. I'll only say on this point that our consistency statement that was submitted with the application materials addresses all of the elements of how this application is consistent with both the comprehensive plan and the town's affordable housing plan. So to set the table for what the statute requires of the board, I think it was important to go through those points. At this time, we'd like to discuss some additional items that we'd like to be have the board knowledgeable about.
I actually sent something to you earlier today. Okay. all files. I'm not sure why it's taking a while. I do have them printed as well. I could pass them across the board if that would, and then it can be seen put to the public accordingly. The last 2 pages, this one from either direction. I'll start with it. And then we'll go in the opposite. Sorry, I only have 2 copies.
All right.
So, see something in there. What are the exact same thing?
Are we there yet? I'm sorry, what? Okay. Is there anything else we can do while this is going on?
TV rotating. You can turn it up. It won't go far, but it will, you can turn it out.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
The breaks, it's yours. Okay,
So we were looking to get,
yeah. Lead on. Okay, we're.
I think it's because it's hidden by the.
Okay,
So we, again, the presentation was meant to be brief because we did,
you need to bring in,
Back, please.
hang on just a sec here, please. Can you bring the microphone closer to your mouth?
so the presentation today was meant to be brief because we were looking to continue to have the conversation and hear feedback. So we didn't make modifications to, aside from a tweak of color and inputting this rendering into the context of the neighborhood. So. Can I ask a question?
I don't know. We
sorry?
figured we'd have you do the presentation and the board
Again?
ask questions, or do you want
She said.
to accept questions?
No,
now?
we didn't prepare a different presentation from last meeting.
No, it's a different graphic, essentially.
It's just a different graphic to add.
So the building hasn't changed.
Nothing's changed
Okay.
about the building. But what we did want to, what we felt in both views was that you can see the scale and color and context relative to the other buildings on Water Street. The tourists are behind it, the 4-story building with the mansard roof down the street, which is what did inspire this design for our project. We felt that it was important to convey the context of the neighborhood for the continuation of this discussion today.
So that was actually my question about the existing structure that is 4 stories tall and in which I took a picture of to compare, and it looks identical to this. This one's just a little bigger. How is the height of, what's the height difference between the 4-story existing and this one?
So the 4-story existing, what we were able to calculate was it's approximately 39 to 40 feet to the top of the mansard. Our building on Water Street is, I believe, 48 feet tall. I'll get that number exact. (47'9".
Thank you.
Yep, so our understanding, Mr. Chair, at the conclusion of the last meeting, our presentation was meant to be relatively brief to save time and resources for everybody, because our understanding at the end of the last meeting was that the board was going to consider, the comments that were made at the last hearing, to the extent it can, the comments that were submitted timely, and then direct questions to the applicant's experts. So
Okay.
we sort of viewed this as an opportunity to answer your questions,
Okay.
but also to put the building, the proposed building, in the right context for your consideration.
All right. Well, and before we start, I would like to say that in over 15 to 18 years that I've sat on the planning board, I have not received as many well-written, cogently presented arguments as we have in this case, and passionate and well thought out for the most part. So thank you for your comments on this and your engagement in the process. It is clear that we are constrained somewhat by the statute for the comprehensive permit, as Attorney Udelli made clear, as Bob has pointed out. However, that doesn't mean that we necessarily like what we're looking at, nor do we have to accept it simply because the boxes are checked. Clearly, one of the great concerns is the historic character of the street. And when I look at this new picture, and when I looked at the one prior to this, I have a hard time understanding what the justification is or what the rationale is behind saying that this, in fact, meets those historic qualities of the street. I mean, I don't see that. I see a really big building, a massive building that looks out of character to the rest of the street. It looks like it's in character with Tourister 2, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Water Street, which is relatively small, 3-story buildings along a historic thoroughfare. And the height and the sheer size of this building feels like it's out of character to the historic nature. Now, so how do you respond to that? Because that is, as our job on the planning board, affordable housing needs must outweigh local zoning and planning concerns. I'd hate to think that our concern and all of the time and effort that has gone into preserving the historic nature of Water Street would be outweighed by affordable housing. So that, to me, is a key element in this. How does this, from your standpoint, meet that historic nature of this area?
Right. I guess I just want to respond first before I let Julie chime in on height and scale, that just to be clear, the local, according to the statute, again, I'm just that the applicant is operating under a statute. And if folks don't like it, they have to visit and speak with the representatives in the state legislature. But according to the statute, the local needs as it applies to the comprehensive plan and zoning, which includes some of the historic concerns that have been leveled, are outweighed unless the town is meeting its quota. The driving factor for the decision is whether the 10% quota is being met. So it's vitally important that the board understand those reasons that I outlined earlier in the statute for why it can deny an application like this. I guess substantively, to your point, outside of the statutory constraints, I think we would say that this project does not fly in the face of the historic nature of the street or the district. When you look in the foreground, you see a 4-story building that this building was essentially based on. Now, sure, this building is bigger than some of the buildings around it. It certainly matches in height other buildings in the area, especially if we go back to the other rendering that takes into account the new addition to the Tourister building and the Tourister building itself in the foreground or in the background.
And again, I mean, we are not hamstrung here by a demand of the statute that would ignore a long-standing comprehensive plan that is based on and a commitment to a National Historic Register district to essentially just say, well, that's the statute, we're going to allow it. I would not feel ethically or morally responsible. And I haven't heard, again, you're referring to Tourister 2, which is a separate element. It's not within that, it's not part of that historic district. And to me, it doesn't hold water as a historic basis. Now, Ben, I'd like to ask you, my understanding is that if it impacts the historic value of a neighborhood, that we have a legitimate concern to object to this.
Absolutely. I provided this board with the standards as we perceive them The attorney gave his presentation and what he thinks the law is in the state of Rhode Island, which is noted. However, I disagree. One of the reasons for denial, it's very clear the proposal is not in conformance with the comp plan. As you know, the comp plan certainly has in the historical aspects of this community in the historical district. Therefore, if it's not compliance, there's certainly a reason for denial of this application. This board has some broad discretion, considering, I will put on the record, considering we're not meeting the 10% quota, but this board does have discretion in terms of making a decision here. And one of the bases, again, for denial, it's that it's the proposal is not consistent with the comp plan.
Just, again, I want to read, I can appreciate what the solicitor is saying. The case law dictates that the driving factor is the quota.
All right. I mean, that feels like bullying. It feels like, a basis. I mean, the 10% is a ridiculous figure that was plucked out of the air. So what we have here is in some ways a battleground of a ridiculous statute that doesn't take into consideration the community. It's a feel-good, we're going to have affordable housing. And quite frankly, the affordable housing here is certainly not Section 8. It doesn't, as one of the witnesses said, meet really low-income needs. This is a middle-income setup. So affordable is a little hard to swallow here. And it was certainly, I don't think, the intent of the legislature, although God knows what they were thinking when they put this thing together, is that affordable housing in this town, we have a lot of low rent apartments. Now, the problem is that they're not defined that way. They're not assigned to that. And this feels to me like we're going to build the biggest thing we can possibly put in there. And I mean, my recommendation would be, I would like you to sharpen your pencils and see what a 3-story building would look like that would need less required variances. And also to allow us to have a third party look at the economics of a 3-story building. You know, now that is, to me, you know, the size and the mass of this is are two of the very strongest arguments that we've heard. In addition, the facades of the building, which is the zoning board, as the planning board sitting as the zoning board, we have the right to say, you know, I'm not fond of that. In fact, the Tourister 2 somehow slipped through because there were people on the planning board who said, no, we've got, you know, we want it to look more like Tourister 1. And because of a previous planning director who didn't define that decision, that thing ended up looking the way it does now. You hardly want a bad decision amplified on Water Street. I mean, I you know. And I would ask you, please, you know, I'm not grandstanding here. I'm trying to be, I mean, I've thought about this as the planning board. We've heard your testimony. We're looking at this and I'm alarmed because there feels like there's no room for compromise. And to me, that's the basis by which good government is run. Not, we have the right to do this and we're going to build the biggest building that we possibly can.
So there's a lot to unravel there. I'm not sure which question to, or if there is a question. I
would start with third story. Would you allow a third party to come in and do the economics based on a 3-story?
I would object to that, Mr. Chair. First of all, that's outside. Economics is not part of the economic aspect of the development is not part of the jurisdiction of the board. The 5 reasons that I outlined earlier do not include economic hypotheticals based on floors that numbers of floors that weren't presented in the application. In fact, the application submission requirements requires a pro forma for the project being proposed, not for hypotheticals where does it end, right? Where does it end? The commenters might ask for a one level. And so
No,
I would
you're
object to the,
asking for variances. I'm saying if you fit within some of the existing variances, it would be more palatable. What you're asking for waiver.
Well,
Now,
wait,
You can fill in here.
Mr. Chair, let me just interrupt real quickly with all due respect. I'm objecting to a third-party economist based on a presentation and proposal that we're not putting forward. If the board would allow us time to consider and discuss with our client the concept of a maximum of 3 floors.
Sure.
That's something we would be willing to consider as long as that's not being made a condition of any decision here now. That's something we'd be willing to discuss with the client.
Well, I'm not sure we can make a decision without that information in front of us.
Mr. Chair, I would just ask that you allow some of the other board members to comment.
I'm going to.
Okay.
So. Yeah, I think we all have different feelings. Some overlapping, maybe some that do not overlap. I don't feel bullied. I appreciate the positions of the applicant's attorney, and you know, we've got the law in front of us, and there's no reason to fight about who's right. We can all, you know, think about that and, you know, deal with it. What I'm hoping to see, and I don't feel like there's been no compromise, no ability to compromise. I think that this is the first time that we've been here with the ability to actually ask questions about whether there would be a compromise. In terms of the chair's comments about the building being not historically in keeping with the historical, you know, sort of image. You know, I think this is one of those things that they say, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I disagree with the
Okay,
chair.
please, it's,
You know,
Please.
so the building has windows in the 4th floor that are nearly identical to 155 Water Street. The colors are in keeping with the historical colors. You know, it's not massive. There's certainly a much bigger building behind it. We're fighting about, it seems like we're fighting about who likes a prettier building or what's a pretty building. That doesn't seem to be, those are not my concerns. My concerns, which I would like you to comment about, are impervious coverage. So you've proposed 85% maximum impervious coverage. Why is that, and why can't it be lower? Because the environment is a concern. Water runoff is a concern in this area, certainly. So tell me about that and why you can't get that number down.
It's a fair question. In terms of impervious lot coverage, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's really, the concern is about drainage. And if this project is allowed to be built, you can affirmatively argue that drainage is going to be better in 3 separate ways. Through the proposed infiltration, you can assure yourself that the quality of the water runoff on this site is going to be better. It's going to be cleaner because that first flush is going to now run through an infiltration basin and not directly into your MS4s. You can affirmatively argue that the volume of runoff is going to be, while not zero, certainly less, because we're allowed to infiltrate through the site. We took test pits about a month ago. It was after we first saw you. We got reasonable water tables, 4 to 5 feet. You can also argue that we will attenuate peak runoff for all of the respective storm events if this is built. So because this is coming up to 100% code compliance, the stormwater runoff will be in a much better position if you allow it to be built. You have better water quality, you have lower volume, and you have attenuation. And a no-build situation, you go back to the current situation that's here.
Have you given any thought to how to reduce the impact of the sort of, the concerns regarding, cars turning around on Citizen Street, backouts, parking? Is it possible to make the entrance to the lot once it's ready, to residents only, so that people can't come back there and do 3-point turns, et cetera? Explore that a little.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly can sign and stripe anything, but ultimately it's an enforcement issue. We can certainly ask for them not to come in, not to make the 3-point turn. Parking is only for residents. We can sign, we can stripe them, but ultimately it's an enforcement issue.
I would agree. So that was the one thing that stood out is that traffic, and I've seen that.
Yep.
And although this is not going to be a popular opinion because it reduces parking, 6 parking spots aren't going to make or break that neighborhood. And so I would almost rather see it just be restricted to residents and primary staff, and then having some type of signage that there's no entrance and because that.
There's
I
no
would say-
outlet, absolutely.
Right, because I would say that was one of the concerns that were brought up that stuck in my mind, and I have seen it happen. I've probably done it myself. And so I think that might be something I would also like to see.
And the same with the loading area. We're not asking for a variance for a loading space for the proposed building, but we know that the existing restaurant doesn't have a loading space. We've heard that over and over at the testimony. The owners are similar. There's no reason that there can't be some type of cross easement or covenants that, because they are such dissimilar uses, in one being a restaurant and the other one being residential with some commercial on the bottom, you can expect that those loading spaces can be shared. So another positive of this element of building this is you can help reciprocate with those loading spaces. It's an urban area. Your code is very homogeneous. It covers your whole town. You're a rural town, but you have an urban section. So you look at parking. Julie and I have done various buildings in Providence. It's such an urban core. Anything under 10,000 square feet, no parking is required. We can do 80 units. It's a different feel. You come here, it's 2 units or 1.5 per. You've got to look at the dissimilar uses respectfully. You have to look at, this is not low income. This is your first year teacher. This is your first year patrolman, your first year fireman. I don't think they're going to have 2 and 3 cars. You've got to look at the personnel or the clientele that you're advertising to, and you have to make those specific site decisions based upon that. I get it. You're balancing affordable housing with the environment and with parking and the needs of the entire community.
And is it true that the existing structures have 20 bedrooms total?
I'm not sure. I mean, the existing structures,
But they do. I'm pretty, does anybody have that? I was reading it does. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so I read that the existing structures have 20, and within our existing zoning, if it's an existing structure, there's no parking requirement. And so the new structures with 15.1, and it would actually have less bedrooms and
Yes.
the parking. And so keeping the existing would actually create more harm in parking than having
And that's been our
20
position.
bedrooms. That's 16 cars that don't have parking that are allowed in that existing, because that's how many bedrooms. So you could have, think about it, 2 cars per household, 8 households, and there's no requirement for parking in existing businesses or residents that are already there, only new development.
And Mr. Chairman, this has been one of our positions from the beginning that,
We're losing the sound somewhat. Are you able? to
yeah, I'm
hear?
back. So, this is not a wooded lot in Forster that if it's denied, it's going to remain wooded. A no build situation here comes with consequences. You still have you have the ability to clean up the drainage, the loading, the parking, and garnish some affordable housing, but it comes with a little bit of a balance. And so I think that's different here than when you see a lot of projects. No build normally wouldn't hold consequences like this would.
Well, in terms of the parking, right now, there's an outdoor seating area outside Water Dog, but there's a curb cut there, and that's the way delivery trucks used to come in. With this proposal, that outdoor seating area would remain
It would, but that curb cut would be eliminated. We want to have a pedestrian area in between the restaurant and the residential building.
But how about delivery trucks going in there? Because one of the things that we heard from residents was that delivery trucks essentially block that street. If you had the ability to come in where the outdoor seating is at night, at times when the restaurant is not operating, that would certainly relieve some of the parking and circulation problems. And quite frankly, I'm astounded that that wasn't considered as part of the fire safety issue, because
Well, if I
don't know where
may,
you would put a fire truck if you didn't drive it through that area that used to be the parking lot and a pass through to the north of Water Dog.
so if I may, it was considered. It is good engineering practice to eliminate the amount of curb cuts, especially that you have on a busy road like this. You would rather have all of the deliveries, all of the traffic go through an existing intersection rather than introduce existing curb cuts. There is validity to your concern, Mr. Chairman, but also I don't want to commingle a fire apparatus and pedestrians during an emergency event. It's just not, respectfully, it's not good engineering practice. And lastly, I know that we heard testimony from fire, but this building is fully sprinkled. So when a battalion comes, you will have that first pumper truck hook up to the hydrant and pressurize that fire department connection for that sprinkler system. There is no way you are going to put a ladder truck in between two buildings of that size while they're burning. That's just not prudent firefighting tactics. And so as we have discussed, we have went through the TRC and we have went through your fire chief and your fire marshal for firefighting in the way they would. As you know, they have a plan for every building in this community and how they would respond and react to that. And this is no different.
Well, backing away from the firefighting, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have commingled those two. For deliveries to Water Dog, that was identified as a serious issue in terms of people behind this proposed development getting out. And it would seem to me that simply moving, allowing that to be used as a delivery process would conceivably address one of the traffic problems.
Yeah, as we said, we're coming back in the spirit of cooperation. We will be happy to look at it. I still have the same two reservations about commingling of commercial delivery use with any type of pedestrian movement or people, recreational. And I also have I also have the concern about the site distance and introducing a new curb cut into that area. Again, be happy to look at it, Mr. Chairman, in the spirit of cooperation, but respectfully, a lot of these things were considered. And I'm just surprised that, they're all, a lot of this was considered in terms of design elements.
Right. I mean, again,
Because it's not shown, it's,
this Water Dog is owned by the applicant.
Absolutely.
So it's part of the process.
that's right. And that's part of the unique character of this
There's an
too.
existing curb cut there, is my understanding.
There
So
is.
It's not a matter of creating a new one, it's using one that was
But it-
in existence.
Respectfully, would be good practice to eliminate that and have everybody come out of that intersection. I think it's hard to argue that. But again, we will take a look.
Can you give me the numbers again about the net bedroom gain or loss if the development is built versus if the existing structures are rehabilitated?
Yeah, so these are 17 residential units. 14 are 1 beds and 3 are 2 beds. So in essence, you've got 20
There's
total,
20
thank you.
total bedrooms
22 total bedrooms if the development is,
currently proposed, correct?
okay.
And
And-
currently
And
also
there's-
has 20.
There's less quantity of units, but that number of bedrooms is the same, correct?
So the net.
So you could have 2 people, roommates
I understand.
living, yeah.
Yeah, so whether you rehabilitate the existing structures or you build the new structure, we want to put 20 bedrooms, is that correct?
That's correct. The bedrooms will not change, but the unit counts will.
And to that note, there has been a peer review done by the town of the structural nature. Bob, I'm not sure if that's been shared with the board or not.
Yes.
Confirming the concerns our structural engineer had about the integrity of that existing building and the need for significant repair and it actually flagged repair that was not even flagged in our original report. So the need for demolition of that is also critical.
How many units are vacant right now?
There's only 2 occupied units in the. And
Meaning how many are vacant?
I think there's 6 units.
6 units vacant
Plus the
But-
commercial unit.
plus the commercial.
Thank you.
Question about the water dog outside seating area. Is there any thought about converting, aside from the walk-through or the drive-through, converting that to parking? Because that would essentially eliminate some of the variant need for parking. There's also a question of what's going to happen to the patrons of Waterdog or their staff. Do you have a plan to provide parking for the staff of Waterdog so that would minimize the demand for parking on Water Street? I mean, I think the parking issue here is not insignificant, and anything you can do to alleviate the parking variance would be a welcome contribution.
We have not considered modifying the outdoor dining back to parking. That is not part of this proposal or something
I
that
know
we'd
it's
like
not
to.
part of it, but. you see-
Or something we'd like to consider at this time. We can take a look and have that conversation with ownership, but it hasn't been something that's been raised.
No.
As far as parking for staff, we have addressed that and they have indicated that they would require all staff, they would notify all staff where public parking lots are available, make sure that that's where their staff are parking and that nobody's parking on the street. That's to allow all street parking to be dedicated to patrons. So that is something that the ownership team has indicated that they would be doing their best to enforce with their staff.
Thank you. So I have one other question. I'm not sure if you're willing to provide the information, but you know what the rents are going to be for the 1 and 2 bedroom apartments?
I believe that's part of the permit as the application as submitted.
We
The
haven't
range.
seen in the letter of eligibility the exact rents, but typically based on previous projects in the last 2 years, it looks like something around $1,550 for a 1-bedroom and $1,650 for a 2-bedroom. But those rents are established by Rhode Island Housing. They're not established by the developer.
Thank you.
And as I understand it, those are in place for 30 years, that affordable.
They're deed restricted for a period of 30 years with a requirement that an outside monitor be retained to check income eligibility as well as what rents are.
Okay. Any more? No?
I have a question. Can you elaborate on how you guys came up with the density for the unit? I'm looking at it. It looks like that for that area, our zoning requires roughly 20 units per acre. And this one is going to be around 68 units per acre. For comparison's sake, if you look at 99 Water Street, the commercial building that was behind that, that's like 30 some odd units per acre. I did my math with just the units, but I understand you were talking about the bedrooms, and it would vary a little bit if if you're using like a lot of number of units that are individual bedrooms, it would change that somewhat. But I think that I haven't really seen any other projects that are like quite so dense compared to even for affordable housing, as compared to this. And I was just wondering if there's any way that this design could get something a little less dense.
We can look at that as Brett indicated earlier. It's something, this is what we came up with originally to make a pro forma work for the project, to make something sort of make sense for the entirety of the development. whether that density is less one beds and more two beds, so the quantity of units decreases, or I can't say that that will still make the project pencil. But we would have to take that back to the full team, including our financial team, and make sure and to understand with ownership if that is something we can
Right,
consider.
right. Well, so, and also on that, do you?
I'm gonna, sorry, respond. From a massing perspective, we were looking to that building down the street. That is the 4-story mass of the building. So that is
Right.
what inspired the scale. Whether there's an agree or disagreement about.
Yeah,
the
no,
scale.
I.
But that is what inspired the scale and the
Please,
density.
could you in the back, keep it down a little? I know that. Thank you.
The existing property also has 2 footprints on it.
Mhm.
And this, we're proposing just a single footprint, and we're also getting ourselves out of the floodplain, which currently the building in the rear lives within that floodplain as well. So that was the other reason for trying to hold everything. If you look at the plan, you'll see how our building
Right,
sort
yeah.
of follows that
The
floodplain.
Water line there.
Mr. Chair, could I just interject for a
Yeah,
second?
sure.
So it's my understanding that you've got the letter of eligibility from Rhode Island Housing, but you don't have a term sheet yet, correct? You don't know what the program is. So what I would suggest is, and what the chair was suggesting is that as proposed now, you've got 17 units, 15 of which are affordable, eligible at 80% of area median income. That the statute only requires you to have 25% of the units be at area median income. So to the chair's request, if we just run a scenario where you're at 25% of the units and we're looking at market rents, what do those economics look like? I just ask that you consider that as part of the evaluation.
Okay.
Great. I mean, again, I think one of the things that, was brought home by the Fuss and O'Neill, the town's engineering firm, is that these buildings are in deplorable condition. And the question of whether they can be saved or not is one of economics that's beyond, our ken here. What we're looking at is, those buildings apparently are on the edge of being condemned by the town, regardless of whether there's a demolition permit or not. The issue for me, certainly, and I don't speak for the board, is the size and height of the building and its conformity with the Water Street streetscape, not tourister. So again, if, and I didn't mean that you were bullying us. I meant that the statute was putting us in the position of feeling as if we were being bullied. I understand that, you're doing your jobs. You're looking at what you can fit there. And what I'd ask for is, as we've said, a smaller building that could still work from an economic standpoint to make it feasible for your client to do this under the comprehensive permit. As Bob has said, that's a 25%, rather than, now we're talking 15 units affordable and 2 not. There may be less affordable units in this building, but it could still work, in my mind, financially, with a shorter, less massive building. So.
Right, and I just to be clear, that concept lines up, I think, with the Rhode Island Housing Eligibility Letter, as I read it. It is, it provides approval for up to 88% affordable, but as you pointed out, the requirement is 25%. So from the developer standpoint, the economics could change, building costs could soar. There's a number of factors that could play into driving down the actual number of affordable units. However, the developer wants to go with as many affordable units as he can develop that makes it feasible. So I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
what the Rhode Island Housing Letter of Eligibility is actually saying.
Okay, and which would require you to get another letter, again, which I don't think is necessarily an undue hardship if that in fact did work, but I think having that in hand would be, we'd appreciate it. You know, it's a matter of taking a look at what is possible and meeting the concerns of the residents. And there are, as you can see, I mean, this is about half the size of the crowd that we had the last time, and the next time there's a public meeting, I fully expect we'll fill the seats again. So it's a matter of grave concern to folks, not just the folks who are butters and live next door, but to those who appreciate the quality of life that Warren affords, and part of that is its historic character on Water Street.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add in, I've said this before, I've testified before the Special Legislative Committee. I had a meeting with the Speaker's office last week. Unfortunately, the deficiencies in the existing legislation put the planning board in a very bad position versus the rest of the residents of town. The comprehensive permit application statute really needs to be relooked at because it really is not addressing the needs of affordable housing. That's not a situation that the applicant created or the planning board created. I have a little bit of distress that Rhode Island Housing has issued a letter of eligibility that is kind of, well, you can build this many units. It doesn't talk about what rents are. It doesn't talk about what the term sheets are. So it's difficult for me to even look at the pro forma and do any kind of analysis and say it could support this much debt or this much, because I don't even know what the interest rate is. But that's not the developers. I mean, the developer met all of the requirements on the checklist. You have a letter of eligibility. So, I mean, I just want to be, I appreciate the community's concern about what's happening, but I also want the community to understand, as I said earlier, the constraints that you all are under based on the statute. But I also don't think that, in fairness to everyone, all the information that is necessary to make an intelligent decision is out there yet. And I'm not blaming the applicant. I'm not blaming his team or you. I mean, Rhode Island Housing and the legislature have put us in a bad position in terms of how we address these issues. So to the council's perspective before, people don't like it, talk to your elected officials in Providence to change that. But, we're going to see, I read some of this, that this is going to open a Pandora's box of, development. I don't think that's the case at all. There's very limited opportunities in the Water Street corridor that somebody is going to come in and do this. If this building wasn't in the state, if this building wasn't in the state of disrepair that it is, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This building is a day away or 2 days away from potentially being condemned. And so somebody has to do an analysis of what the cost is to rehabilitate this building, what the timeline would be to do that, and what the cost of that would be. So I just want to have that on the record.
Honestly, I am always a huge fan of saving historic homes, because for me, and Bob knows this about me, I am very pro economic development. In towns like this actually is a good thing for economic development because people come here. So I never want to see a building destroyed. So much so that yesterday on my Sunday morning, I was snooping around the property because I had to see for myself that this building was in that bad of shape. And the fact that people live there is heartbreaking to me, that people in this town have to live in a building like that. It is awful. I mean, aside from just the facade, I was afraid it would fall over on me. You could see the termite damage from inside, and it is awful. And so if you don't believe me, please, you can see it for yourself. From the side is curved so dense, but so far in that it is awful. And I sat next to the fire chief and I looked at him and I said, this is terrifying to you, isn't it? That people are here. He goes, if we knew that we weren't going to displace people and not give them time, we wouldn't have anybody here. That's how bad this is. And so, and I looked at rentals. I won't talk unless I've done my research and looked at my data. And rentals on Medicom for a 1 bedroom in an old dated apartment is over $1,000 a month. And so, yeah, unfortunately, in a brand new building in an urban center, that is a rent. That's what people are paying. And it's not up to us, but there isn't. And in the amount of units that are actually available in this town, I found 7 in the whole town that are for rent right now. And so there's clearly a need. And I get the size. And sometimes on a picture, you see this huge building, but I also went down the street and took a photo of the building that they're comparing it to. And it's identical. I have it on my phone if anybody would like to see it. It's not as deep,
Okay,
but it is
please.
identical to the structure. And so, Fred, you get to talk all the time.
No, I was asking.
Okay. And
No.
so, I mean, just, it's, I know change is hard, but the aesthetics can be changed. I'm sure the architects, if there's a color thing or a theme thing, they can make it look to the town and we can discuss these things with them. But we're really, there is laws in place that we have to abide by.
Can I chime in on the scale for a second?
Sure.
So we will go back and take a look at all of the feedback that we've received today and appreciate all of your comments because we will take that into consideration and bring that to our ownership. But I did want to point out that when we were designing this building, we consciously did not want a rectangle and a box. And so that's why you do see movement in the facade and it steps back a couple of feet here and there. And we tried to respond to the windows in the mansard down the street and the windows. We certainly can add some more trim and take another look at the height and take another look at the aesthetics and the detailing of this building to try to make it fit more in the context of this neighborhood based on the feedback that we're getting. But I did want to mention that we did pay attention to this. I don't know what's happening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That we didn't propose the same kind of a 4-story, 18-20 unit building that we would propose on Atwell's Ave in Providence or, in a different context. So we were paying attention to this, but we will take these thoughts into consideration and come back with something.
Thank you. Mike?
So Bob, what's the nature of the historic district? And then the other question is, what's the definition? And there's a lot of email about tearing down a historic building. What's the definition of historic? Is it just old? Is that
Over 100 years old.
over 100 years old qualifies as
Right,
historic?
right.
And the historic district, does it have limitations or?
There is a boundary limitation, but under the demolition ordinance for the historic district, an application for a demolition permit has been filed. The Historic District Commission has 30 days to provide a recommendation in normal cases to the town council, but in this case to the planning board as to, what they think should happen. But that needs to take into consideration the structural integrity, the cost, and then what those preservation efforts would be. Preserving this building, I know there was comments about, disruption because of construction. Preserving this building will also be disruptive because the building will have to be elevated at least 8 to 12 feet off the ground in order to redo the foundation. There's some question as to, this, and I'm not a structural engineer. I mean, I will defer to others, but what the structural integrity of lifting that building up would be and how you would do that. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done or it can be done, but there is a process.
So, but the town's peer review engineers said that essentially the costs of saving the building were understated because of some elements.
Right, there was some cost additional that had not been in the initial report that the applicant had done, but, again, that's for you all to take into consideration when you get, a recommendation from the Historic District Commission.
What I'd like to do would be, so that we're not, we're dealing with this in a timely manner. We could hold a special meeting, either the 7th or the 14th. If you wanted to come, if that would give you enough time It
Mr.
would,
Chair, it can't be the seventh because the town council is meeting on the seventh because of the eighth where they normally meet is election.
okay, so
It'd have to be the
it would
14th.
have to be the 14th or is that, no, then I'm just
You
trying
know,
to,
in order to consider everything that people have asked of us today,
Yeah.
we would need the month.
okay, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do that. I know we have a.
I
clock.
appreciate what you're
You
offering,
know,
but
I mean, it wasn't intended to rush.
no. If we need to reach out to a few
Um,
different folks to assist us in this.
So again, what we were looking for were some concerns about the outdoor parking. We were looking for the financials regarding a 3-story
Yeah.
smaller building, more in proportion to those houses. I mean, I must say that, and I'm not gonna get into that.
I would just say that if, you know, and I've raised this with applicants council. November 15th is,
Please, ma'am, you know, hello, please don't do that.
November 15th is the expiration of the 120 days under the certificate of completeness. So I would request that the applicant consider a discussion on a waiver of the timeline, if in fact they need that extra time, but also be moving forward, understanding that some members of this board have vacation plans or holiday plans. You know, right now we're down to 6 members that can hear this application. We need a minimum of 5 that can vote on this. So, I mean, I think it might be, I understand you might want to continue this, but we need to work out a schedule moving forward on who's available and what dates are going to work.
Yeah, well, so we'll have to get back to, I mean, it may be that our regularly scheduled meeting we would not be able to have enough people here.
Well, I would like to do that tonight, so.
Yeah, we will, and then we would let you know. So. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna put you on that.
I think as long as we have the month, we can be prepared on Mr. Rulli's request. We can't agree to a waiver of the 120 days, but we would agree to a 30-day continuance. Yeah. Extension is better.
Yeah, it would, but I mean, we might have to have a series
Well,
of
let's,
30
you
days.
know,
Right.
cross that bridge.
Yep.
We'll talk on the 29th day of the first extension.
Okay, great. So we'll see you.
No, so you need a motion to
Continue.
continue this and then also that the next meeting, in order for the applicant to introduce information in response to comments from the community as well as this board, that is going to need to be a public hearing.
Yep. So we're asking for a continuance of this and that this would be noticed as a public meeting. To do so, we'd have to, that decision has to be made at least 2 weeks before.
So November 28th would be the next regularly scheduled meeting of the planning board. Does that give you enough time?
What
Okay,
is the regular schedule, the 28th,
that would be the 28th. Yep, that's the 4th Monday in November.
October?
November.
I can't do that, I'm in California.
Well, that's why we need to talk about what
Yeah,
people's schedules
so
are.
we'll talk about that. I mean, again, I apologize, but it's the nature of the beast. The town council hasn't appointed, there's been no one, you know, running for the position. And we have to have people here who have heard the process. You know, we can't just drop somebody in. We have another member, Matt Atwood, who was not here the last time. I mean, he's listening in, but I don't think that counts.
Doesn't count. And we have a member that has a health issue. Is it possible that, Mike, are you here on the 21st? And it doesn't always have to be on a Monday, by the way.
No, that's fine.
Now, I can do the 14th or the 15th.
The 14th isn't gonna work.
Huh?
Right?
There's nothing, which is
They don't have
21st.
time. Does the 21st or that week of the 21st give you any time?
We have a conflict on the 21st.
So let's just
All
start
right,
this
so
way.
let's handle this offline.
Well, no, we need them to be here so they can, because I don't need the, we've got to schedule it.
No, I know, but I
So,
mean,
Michael, when are you away?
I am away from the 20th of November to the beginning of December, so it's Thanksgiving.
Okay, anybody else not available during that time period? And Mr. Leffers, you're away in the month of January? Okay,
so we could still do it with 5 people though, right?
could still do it with 5 people, but then or putting people on life support if something happens.
And when you got.
December 5th, does that work?
I can do December fifth.
Okay,
December 5th.
Is December 5th? So this meeting, this hearing will be continued to December 5th as a special meeting, as a public hearing, which will be advertised.
So no.
We will still have our regular scheduled meeting in November. Mr. Gerhart will be absent.
okay. Great.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't do anything, I just email.
Does,
You
does
need a
that,
motion to continue it, Mr. Chair?
Could I have a motion to continue the meeting and this will be a public meeting on December 5th? What day is that?
It's Monday.
It's a Monday. Okay.
Motion to continue. meeting to December 5th.
Second, Mike, all in favor? Aye. All right.
Chair, Mr. Chair, does that address matter 8A on the agenda or?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that we skip the housing element because Allison is not able to be here, And
Okay,
that
we're gonna do
we-
the marijuana.
which we all probably need at this point. Yeah, we just let these people disperse before we
Yeah.
continue. Unless they want to stay for marijuana. Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
clerk is asking for a 5-minute recess.
sure.
Will it be on the ballot in November?
It is on the ballot.
It
in
is on the
November.
ballot.
Yep, it is on the ballot. So
This ordinance?
no,
No.
whether or not the ordinance only comes into
Follows.
play if, in fact, the residents approve an ordinance for retail sales of marijuana,
Retail would include recreation.
recreation. That's correct.
That's on the ballot.
That's on the ballot. Some would call it
Yeah,
vocation.
I mean,
but I'll go with
it's
recreation.
very definitive and detailed.
Thank you.
I didn't see anything that popped up, but anyone else on the board?
Just offhand, so the use table has the zones that it's possible in. And then there's another modifying clause that says it has to, if it's in that zone, it has to be 100 feet from any residential zone. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I got your, so I think you're talking about section C, number 5. That a licensed cultivator, non-residential cultivation must not be located
Right.
within. So I mean, it's not, I think it's the not located that is, the language is a little bit confusing. That you couldn't be, within a residential district. What's really interesting about this is that for cultivation, you have to be 1,000 feet from a school, but for recreational sales, you only need to be 500 feet.
So,
Well,
so
that's
that language
because
that's confusing, Bob, is that going to be straightened out? or-
Well, that's the state, and that's the state legislation. I mean, that is how the legislature approved it. It's not at the discretion of the town. I mean,
I'm sorry, what's the confusion about? We're going to.
so in the state, with respect to cultivation, that the requirement is you can't have a cultivating facility within 1,000 feet of a school.
5B and 6B.
What the legislature approved is you could have retail sales within 500 feet of a school.
I understand that, okay, maybe that is.
I was talking about the use table.
What's confusing about the language?
Well, I think, Mike had raised, there was some confusion on the 100 feet from the residential districts. I mean, the language is awkward in terms of how if you read it fast, it says it can't be located, but then it's saying in the business, commercial, industrial, rural business, and waterfront zoning district, it can't be within 100 feet of the nearest residential zoning district.
Anything else?
So would that cover like, let's say this development here, if it's in a mixed use development in a sort of quasi mixed area, is that?
I think I would defer to the solicitor and not for an answer now, whether or not, residential districts are only the R districts, or does village business constitute a residential district? I mean, I think that's a legal interpretation. I mean, obviously people live in that neighborhood because we
Yeah, right.
saw most of them tonight. I would have,
Is the intent to not have people in town? Because I would think that they would.
well, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, when we've had people interested in wondering where we are, there are people that have suggested that Water Street would be a prime location for a boutique cannabis retail facility, or even on Main Street area. So, again, I'll defer to the solicitor's office in terms of whether village business is constituted as a residential district, or are we only talking about R6, R10, R15, 20,
Well, it says, isn't that a special permit? The village.
everything
business?
will be a special use permit
Yeah. I
in
mean,
any
so
case.
that- if it is, that to me. The only thing that's allowed throughout the thing is residential cooperative cultivation and personal marijuana cultivation. So I'm thinking grow lights in your basement or something.
Well, I mean, this ordinance, I mean, we already have a cultivation ordinance on the books. We had it for a couple of years. This is strictly retail and then also laboratories, because the testing and so, you'll see that, we've eliminated on the use table, laboratories in certain neighborhoods. We think that those should be laboratories should be limited to manufacturing, commercial, industrial, and if they are going to be in the waterfront district, that it have to have a special use permit.
Well, all of those testing laboratories based on this chart need to have a special use permit.
Well, anywhere we allow
Right,
it
so
would require
anywhere-
a special use permit. I mean, again, I don't know what, the recommendation of this board is do you even want a laboratory in the waterfront district?
No,
So we can eliminate that if
You can-
there's agreement on that.
why I know this, but there is a larger facility in Newport that grows. And when you harvest and they do the testing, you smell it very, very strongly. And I learned about it just because I was going to a business to help them and.
Don't
and I
incriminate
had-
yourself.
But I was so surprised because I was like, what is going on around here? Because it was so strong. And they said, no, it's when you're like.
So if
doing
there's
whatever, it's-
consensus amongst the board to eliminate the waterfront district for laboratories, we can
Well, I'll
certainly.
just say if that's the case, then non-residential cooperative cultivation, because like Peter Smith, Peter King rather, had a cultivation going on in a building of his, and the smell there was really.
What zone was it in?
Well, no, what I'm saying is, this is allowing it in the waterfront, so if we're taking out the cannabis,
The laboratory testing.
yeah,
Yep.
if you go up, non-residential cooperative cultivation.
We can't change that. That already exists.
Oh.
The only
for-
things that we're
in the
adding is
waterfront?
cannabis retailer and cannabis testing,
Oh, okay, gotcha.
but we can certainly eliminate testing laboratory from the
My
waterfront. district.
personal opinion is, and that's when I'm gonna vote in the elections, to not allow any recreational sales in Warren. But I don't know how the board might address that with regard to this, with regard to this ordinance. Is it even appropriate to take that under consideration now or wait until the town vote?
Well, because of the delay, no, I think your concern is acknowledged. None of this is gonna take effect until after the vote.
Yeah.
So
But if the town vote,
we can continue this again until after the election to see. if
Well,
the
wait a
results-
minute, I want to understand what the members' concern is. If my understanding of the posture of this is that it's on the ballot, whether to allow retail marijuana.
If it's approved, whether we would allow it. Or not. So if it's voted down, this has become null and
I
void.
know, it's my point is, the question on the ballot is, does Warren allow retail sales in Warren?
Correct. And if they do, where?
and retail includes recreation.
So,
Yes, oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again?
His question is that retail includes recreational marijuana.
Because there's medical sales,
Yeah.
sales for
Retail is all recreation.
and retail, okay.
So
There are separate
I'm seeking
licenses.
this definition.
So that's right. So that's what I want to know. I said, the town is voting on whether or not to allow retail recreational sales.
That's correct.
Right. So we can't gut this ordinance by not allowing retail recreational sales if they approve it, correct?
Oh, Barrington tried to do that, but yeah.
I'm sure people will.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I think you're right.
What is there like, do we get any tax benefit or?
There
like, what
are,
is the benefits?
I mean,
to that
that's the
consumer?
part that's in flux right now in terms of what the compensation, the town will realize some proceeds from the sale, not an awful lot, like the hotel tax, it's like 1%. I mean, the tax on cannabis is pretty high. The majority of it is going to the state. There's all kinds of fluky things in there that if you have been incarcerated, you should have priority in terms of getting a license because you're a good person.
Hey, I mean, some people have been in the business a lot longer.
No money for the municipality, the way it's going.
Yeah, if we don't have a facility, we don't
Yeah,
get
we don't
any
get
money.
any, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And again, I think my understanding is in the region we're in, there's only 6 licenses that are gonna be issued initially. So there's absolutely, in my sense is that we've had most of the interest of people that are prospecting are looking at the Metacom corridor, which I'm not in favor of that at all, based on everything else we're doing, but there's no guarantee that, we're gonna be one of the 6 communities chosen to have a license.
did you wanna, rather than, why would you prefer to have us vote on this tonight than later?
just so we can clear the decks. I mean,
Okay.
we got a lot
Well,
of
the
stuff.
town
going on.
council's asked for a recommendation, haven't
Right, I mean, they did initially because it looked like all this was gonna happen in December, but it looks like that might be delayed, but I mean, what I'm hearing is that, you know, some members don't want it at all, that's not a question, because if it's voted by the voters, we have to have an ordinance, but if, you know, eliminating the testing laboratory in the waterfront district is the modification you wanna make, I think that's totally appropriate.
Is there like a, I'm sorry, is there like a scale or like, does the state regulate the size of the building or can like we have like
No, you have.
marijuana mini mall?
Yeah, I mean, and that's why they need to go for a special use permit, that would
Okay,
fall
so
under
we can-
zoning. I mean, if you look, you know, there are. I highlighted a particular section with respect to security. I mean, that is, you know, in consultation with the police, looking at communities in Massachusetts. I mean, there are a number of things that have to happen in terms of security. And licensing that we want to make sure are in this ordinance because. We do, I mean, it's, you know, I will say that we do have a commercial cultivation facility on Franklin Street that has all the security, and quite honestly, we haven't had any incidents. It's very well run and maintained. I think retail is a whole different animal. I mean, and then it's gonna come down to pricing. I mean, now all of a sudden, you know, somebody might go to Fall River and get weed for less. Mind your
Okay,
business,
well,
weed for less.
can I have a motion to accept the ordinance as amended, by Ashley,
Eliminating the
eliminating
Laboratory in the
the
waterfront
laboratory testing in the waterfront district?
so moved.
Second,
second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, those opposed? Okay, we have 5, 4, and Jim Lefferts voting against.
Okay, and the last thing, so we've talked about the future meetings, at least in the short term for 119 Water Street. We gave you what the proposed 2023 regular meeting schedule is. If we could just either accept that or make modifications, I mean, there's a great chance that as we get into the calendar year, we might have to make modifications, but we have a requirement to set that calendar at the beginning of the year.
And the rest of them are at the usual time.
Yep.
Yeah, so, could I have a motion to accept that with the understanding that we can alter it at any time?
Motion.
Second? Ashley, all in favor? Aye. Okay,
Anything else a board member would like to talk about? Their feelings?
Is there anything further on the project at the bridge?
At the National Grid site?
Yeah.
Other than some members of the town council and town administration were served with a lawsuit.
wow.
For some reason, I wasn't one of the lucky ones, even though I put the deal together, but, so, yeah, I mean, that's in litigation now. I can't share with you that, you know, there are other developers that have come forward and expressed an interest, but, can't, what's that? We did originally, yeah. Well, that RFP went out, so the lawsuit is the developer not fulfilling the requirements of the memorandum of understanding.
I would like to know,
Pull the plug again.
there is an affordable housing program that, Bob, you know, that was noted in the newspaper. I don't know if you read about it, but.
Yep, so, right, through, you know, we did 2 things for the community through ARPA funding. We put $250,000 out for spot improvement program that was completely subscribed. I could probably do another $250,000. I know that Ethan Hartley is doing an article in the paper highlighting some of the properties. We also allocated $250,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We actually have a full board of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund now. So that money is grant money. It doesn't have to be repaid. It has to be for projects that are within the downtown 305 census tract. And it was going to require a 30-year commitment that it'd be affordable housing. But, you know, as an example, above Rhodey Roots and above Coffee Depot, we have vacant second floor. So we're trying to encourage property owners to convert that to housing. There's no set limit. I mean, we could do 250 on one project, we could do 10 on one, but as part of the Metacom plan and the form-based code, we anticipate getting additional funds coming in there because we're offering density bonuses, and if a developer didn't want to do the density at that site, they can make a contribution, but we're trying to promote more housing in the downtown area, and hopefully.
For those, the fourth floor, 4 bedrooms might end up over roadie roofs. Yeah,
They could.
just saying.
We'll go off the record now.
Okay, well, in terms of printed material, I know that Mike had noted that he wondered if there was a place. There is a central location for printed copies of all of the letters that we receive. I know it's kind of difficult keeping track, but quite frankly, for the sake of Bob's sanity, I think, if you can print them out yourself or you can keep them electronically oriented, we'd appreciate it. However, Rhonda does have those if you need them.
Right, I mean, and somebody came in today and said, how come you don't have this all online? Well, first of all, you have a laptop computer and I give you these building plans online, you're not going to be able to make anything out of it. I mean, it's never been the practice of the planning board to do anything other than post the agenda. And for you, I always share the information that we're given. It's hard to blow up a PDF and get some scale, but the public and anyone else is always allowed to come in and look at the file. So all the correspondence, some of them, Rhonda was out today, but she's good about getting them all printed. All the plans are in here. And so, can we adjourn the meeting? And then I just want to say something.
Oh, well. Yes, can we have a motion to adjourn? Ashley, second, Brett, all in favor? Aye.